Hi, Sam.
Hi, Hannah.
Hi,
Hi.
Morgan. We have a guest today. Morgan, who are you?
Hi, I'm Morgan Bosher, he or they pronouns, and I'm a lover of this podcast and a dear friend of it as well.
Yeah. Morgan and I went to college together where I was a terrible employee of his. And then we made actual friends once we were adults and I was a responsible employee. I did help you carry some pizza in one time.
That was very valuable. It was right after my top surgery, so it was necessary and a very kind gesture.
Morgan has a lot of expertise, but he comes to us today mainly as a trans person.
Happy to be here, as such.
No pressure, but you're speaking for all the trans people.
I feel comfortable with all of this and very qualified.
Morgan also comes to us as a twice published graphic novelist.
Yeah, well, about to be. My second book, it's a graphic novel. It launches 1 week from tomorrow.
Yay!
Yes. Which, if you're hearing this, the book will already be out. So you can rush to the bookstore right when you finish listening to this, and you can grab your copy of
Chicken Heart. And it's about a trans stand-up comedian who's closeted and gets to explore his identity by traveling to an upstate woodland commune built to protect trans people.
It's great, and I have to read it again and actually pay attention to the art in it, but it made me feel a lot of feelings. It made me identify with a character who has a life experience that I don't have.
Oh, I'm really happy to hear that. That was the point.
But today, we're going to talk about something tangentially related to Chicken Heart.
Today we are talking about everyone's favorite boogeyman of the day, transgender women in sports.
Ah! I'm not frightened. I think the spoiler here is that we're all fine with trans women and girls playing sports. That's not the conclusion that we're going to reach. That's our stance heading into this conversation.
Yes.
So if you're looking for a measured debate about whether trans women should be allowed to kick balls, you're not going to get it here. So, trans women in sports is a big friggin' deal lately for reasons that don't make any logical sense. Since 2020, 27 states have passed legislation banning trans girls and women from participating in sports at the K-12 and collegiate levels. It is not true that in all 27 of those states, you cannot compete in sports at the K-12 or collegiate levels if you are a trans woman or girl. A lot of them are currently blocked by court orders, but it's just in the past 5 years, there's been an avalanche of these laws being passed. In addition to that, the NCAA in February 2025 updated its policy on trans participation in sports. This was in response to an Executive Order 14201 from the Trump administration, titled Keeping Men Out of Women's Sports. And the executive order is incredibly inflammatory. We're not going to look at it. We're just going to talk about what the NCAA policy is. And what the NCAA policy is now is that trans women can participate in women's sports only at practice, meaning that they also can participate in what the NCAA describes as the benefits of being part of the team. I assume that means, you go to team building activities, you get your jersey, you get supportive healthcare, which I assume means you get, an ice pack and an ace bandage if you twist your
probably.
ankle. Oh, really? Oh, that's
depending on
more
what,
high-tech
yeah.
than I was thinking. But they may not compete. And trans men, meanwhile, may compete on women's or men's team as they see fit, but need to complete a medical exemption process if they take testosterone. And as for non-binary people, it's that if you are AFAB, you can participate in women's or med sports. And if you are AMAB, you can compete in men's sports only.
Assigned female at birth and assigned male at birth.
That's what those mean. Cis woman and a trans man would both be AFAB. Because when they were born, the doctor said, "That's a girl, because I'm looking at a vagina."
That's the size of it.
That's the size. So that was a recent development. From 2022 to 2025, the policy on trans participation in NCAA sports was different. It was modeled after Olympics rules, and it varied by sport. Trans women and AMAB people, so I guess non-binary AMAB people who would prefer to compete on the women's sports team, would have to prove that they had been on HRT for a certain amount of time and submit to testosterone level tests, whereas trans men generally could join the men's team whenever and compete on the women's team only as long as they had like low enough testosterone levels, and different sports had different rules.
I think the most recent Olympic update came in 2015 as far as like specific measurement levels.
Mm-hmm.
I think their stance more generally has become that they recommend individual sports federations decide what testosterone level is appropriate for trans women's participation in women's sports.
And the NCAA, in all of their language releasing this new policy, talked about, they didn't admit that they were doing this in response to the executive order. They said they wanted to adopt a fairer policy by adopting one policy that would be applicable across all sports. So I want to kick it to you guys. You can probably guess my answer to this based on my tone. Does it seem fairer to have one uniform policy across all sports, from gymnastics to rugby to swimming to beach volleyball?
All sports are the same, so I don't see why you would need different policies.
And I think that starts to get into what I'm sure we will talk about more, which is we're seeing kind of the logical breakdown of this strict male-female division, which I think we could also point to the fact that like that division has always had its issues.
Yeah, I think like everyone in this room, especially Jade, because she is like a hardcore radical feminist, would agree that the idea that there are two discrete sex categories is pretty bunk. So it's always been problematic, I think, to divide up sports this way. It would be problematic, I think, also to not have any kind of tracking or differentiation based on like height and weight differences or hormonal differences. But I think trying to split it into men and women also doesn't make sense.
No, and it's a red flag whenever people try to make simple out of the complexity of reality. They're trying to go in a simpler direction, whereas what would really control different variables and make competition more fair is to like embrace the complexity and to account for all the variation across bodies and sports and abilities.
Something that I've learned from paraclimbing is there's a way to do that where you are undefensively treating it as a process that doesn't have a perfect destination. In paraclimbing, there are categories based on different disabilities and different levels within each category, depending on level of impairment. They're constantly revamping these based on what they learn from the athletes. And we talk a lot about it's inherently unfair to try to classify disabled people.
So Hannah, you won, congratulations, a competition in rock climbing.
An endurance competition.
An endurance competition, okay.
Not skill.
There was a variable.
Actually, no, there was a skill component to it. You got more points if you climbed more difficult routes.
That's true. Sam and I, we recently did a fundraiser for one of my paraclimbing groups, and it was like an all-night climbathon endurance competition. What they did was they had people register, and they said, are you a beginner, intermediate, or advanced climber? And are you a paraclimber or a non-disabled climber? And, based on how many people registered, would have split it up into different levels of groups. So like they ended up collapsing all of the paraclimbers together because they simply didn't have enough for it to be like an actual competition between beginner, intermediate, and advanced. And then for the non-disabled climbers, they separated them out into beginner, intermediate, and advanced. And depending on which level you put yourself in, you got a certain amount of points per route that you climbed, depending on the grade, like the difficulty grade of the route. And yeah, it wasn't gendered. They had like a schema for it before we went into the competition, and then they adjusted based on who actually enrolled. So it's just to say that there are lots of different models for this.
Yeah, the stark black and white man-woman one seems particularly hierarchical.
Yeah, and like hierarchical, and also like trying to put a mold on reality that reality doesn't fit.
Well, at the same time saying it's objective reality that there are two sexes.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And there's winners and losers in that dichotomy, like by design.
Right. And that's the other thing that we can get into later is women's sports get shortchanged a great deal. And there are a lot of inequities. So, okay, you guys want some more facts?
Let's go.
So 27 states, right? Executive order coming from the highest office in the country, complete revamping of the NCAA's policies. Meanwhile, how many trans athletes actually are there competing? The president of the NCAA recently told Congress that of the 500,000 college athletes in the country, less than 10 are trans, and they're not all trans women.
What?
Yes. As far as we know, right? Because we're not like examining people's genitals when they sign up for college sports.
So sweeping national policy change for fewer than 10 people, maybe.
It's proportionate, Morgan. Meanwhile, in K through 12 schools, fewer than 2%, that is between 1.4 and 1.8%, of youth between the ages of 13 to 17 self-identify as trans. And among those youth, they are underrepresented in sports. So about 40% of trans youth might play on a sport team. Like that includes non-binary youth, trans boys, and trans girls. So like a fraction of a fraction are actually trans girls. So according to an article that I looked up on US News, less than half of 1% of high school athletes are trans. This was as of 2023. So big reaction to a very small population.
Mm-hmm.
Despite that, big splashy controversies have been in the news and on social media. And, you know, we're a bunch of friends having fun, so we're not going to be quoting any hateful rhetoric right now or getting into, like, gross commentary. But we are going to look at a couple of examples because I think that they are elucidating. I was originally going to research this example, and then I realized that I'm not Robert from Behind the Bastards, and I don't know how to research an individual person's life to a degree that I can make it interesting. But this is Leah Thomas and Riley Gaines. Leah Thomas is a trans swimmer. She was a college swimmer. She competed first on the men's team, transitioned. She had been on HRT for the required amount of time to compete on the women's team. And there's data, you can look it up. Her swimming times got slower. She lost a lot to cis women because you don't win your sport all the time. And in this particular race, she was racing against Riley Gaines in the 200-yard freestyle. This was in March of 2022. And the two swimmers tied for 5th place. They didn't have 2 5th-place trophies. They gave Thomas the 5th-place one, and they gave Gaines the 6th-place trophy. And out of this, Gaines has made an entire-ass career bitching about this race. You were talking to your parents about trans women in sports. You were doing some deep canvassing. You said that you and your parents had all agreed that, like, while there are some fairness issues to address, that trans people are not the problem. And I said, I would take it even further than that. I think that the entire question is an overblown piece of bullshit. And we looked up Leah Thomas. That was when I think we both first found out about what the NCAA policy was before the executive order, that you had to have been on HRT for a certain amount of time before you could switch teams. And that was also when we found out how overblown the race was, that there was a tie for 5th place. And it just goes to show this kind of game of telephone that happens with these sensationalized stories, because I think that you had just a vague impression of this swimmer.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And yeah, I think, again, when you put it in perspective of, like you said, 10 people out of 500,000 athletes at the college level, the level of outrage against it from certain people is not in proportion. There's more going on here than just a question of fairness. And I think that really seeps over a lot into this vilification of trans women.
Yeah. I think a lot of perfectly well-meaning people have an idea in their head that they hear the name Leah Thomas and they think, oh, she like kicked everyone's ass at swimming. No, she tied for 5th place. Because the stories get so sensationalized and reported in like vague terms, and you hear, you know, sound bites, or you hear somebody talking about a sound bite that they heard. And Riley Gaines, I think, is a really interesting example of the right-wing grift about this.
I mean, it's easy to have a scapegoat when you have that vilification, when, you know, these stories get sensationalized and passed around, and then people make these simplified connections over, oh, well, yeah, like that doesn't sound fair that trans people are taking hormones, and that, you know, obviously gives an edge and da-da-da. But right, when the stories themselves are not aligning with the reality, but also B, the systems themselves not making sense with reality either as valid ways to rank people in competition.
Or maybe like just not even understanding like how transitioning works. You just said, oh, trans people are taking hormones and that's not fair. Like, I wonder whether a lot of the people who are worried about fairness in women's sports know the basics about like when you transition in a trans feminine direction, what you're doing is taking estrogen and suppressing your testosterone.
That's right.
Right. Like when you're transitioning in a FTM direction, what you're doing is taking testosterone. And I feel like there's an idea that some people have that when you're trans, all you do is socially transition. And it has always been that you can just socially transition and immediately start competing in women's sports.
Right.
Which has never been the case. And I'm not saying that like the way that it was before was perfect, but that's never happened.
Yeah, that's very much the way that it gets framed by the right wing is these people are losing in male sports. So they're making the decision to transition so that they can compete in female sports.
Because that's the easier path.
Yeah. Can you imagine? Like, I want to win at swimming so badly that I'm going to inject myself with hormones every, week, month? I'm going to get a new passport.
Put everything at risk, too, because when you transition, you put everything at risk. Nobody knows what they're going to have left after coming out. Friends I expected to have still once I came out, I didn't have. And then, other relatives I was afraid to come out to ended up being some of the most supportive ones. Mm-hmm. But I've met people like through support groups and conventions who've lost so much, lost jobs and housing and family and all kinds of relationships.
And it shouldn't be that way. But I feel like the fact that it is that way is so illustrative of the fact that it's not something you do unless you need to do it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Oh my gosh. My big delay in coming out was denial because I couldn't envision a life after transitioning. I couldn't picture, how I could have a good, normal, livable life. And it took me meeting other trans people and hearing their stories and seeing them online to understand, oh, this is something I can do. Mm-hmm. It's still horrifying because everything's at stake and I don't know what's going to be left after I go through this.
So many forces almost like against you.
People hating you for no reason at all. Just like before they've ever met me, they hate me.
Riley Gaines.
Exactly. There's just so much variability in transition itself. Yeah, some people take hormones once a week. Sometimes it's a shot. Sometimes it's a patch. Sometimes it's a couple weeks. This assumption that, okay, you're one day a man, now you're a woman, just at the snap of the fingers. No, this process takes years.
It'd be great if it was the other way, though. That would be convenient. Can we come up with that? Hey, Sam. Can you make that drug?
I don't know if I'm the most qualified person for that.
You're the most qualified person here, unless Jade has a medical degree that I don't know about.
It's up to you, Sam.
I thought you were an ally, Sam. There's another example that I wanted to bring up to you guys because I think it's a really elucidating one. This was in the 2024 Olympics, and there was a boxer. I might butcher the pronunciation of her name. I'm so sorry. Iman Khalif. She is a boxer. She's cis. And she made headlines just for appearing insufficiently feminine. And I wanted to bring it up because it's an example of how these policies banning trans women end up harming just anyone gender nonconforming, including like butch cis women and any AFAB people who don't perform womanhood sufficiently for this specific ideal, which is going to be a lot of athletes. Because athletics are a lot of the time about who's the biggest and the strongest.
I know when I heard about it that it kind of dives into this territory of transvestigating where it's like trans or cis person. People are diving into their personal lives to try and find this out. All in the effort of supposedly fairness. We got to make sure we know who the trans people are, I guess, is the logic of it all. But it really just seems like it's another iteration of
investment in essentializing, maybe? I can always tell that I don't have to worry that maybe another version of gender is truthful.
It is inherently, like, it can't not be transphobic in the same way that so much homophobia of the early 2000s and earlier than that, was about trying to identify who the gay people were.
Oh, yeah. It's like kind of like McCarthyism. Yeah. And if you don't comply, then you are under suspicion.
Right.
It makes me think about Christy Martin, the
dat?
boxer. I saw a film that Sydney Sweeney recently played
Mhm.
her in, and it's a true story
Mm-hmm.
that follows Christy, who was this outstanding boxer, and she was abused and she narrowly survived murder from her coach and husband. And he coached her look as well. And, you know, she would wear these pink hyper femme boxing shorts and outfits. And
This whole thing smacks of gender.
it so does, and to have it so closely tied to domestic violence,
Yeah.
it's just such a clear thread to me
Mm-hmm.
that being shoved into a gendered box for performance, because there's performance too, her being in the ring is
Well, it's kind of like it is incumbent upon you to compensate for your participation in a combat sport, which is undesirably masculine.
Mhm.
So you must perform extra femininity. It's kind of like tradwife influencers, how they have to cover up for the fact that they are making a lot of the money for their household by performing extra subservience and hyperfemininity to their husbands.
completely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they have to like balance the scales and be like, I'm not undermining or emasculating my husband. Like
Yeah.
that all goes to him,
Uh-huh.
even though I'm the breadwinner here.
So the thing about Iman Khalif is that she is Algerian, and for certain women of color, that target of compensatory femininity is just vanishingly distant. It can't be done because ideal femininity is white femininity, right?
Mm.
And so these transvestigations, they tend to harm women of color the most. And that sucks.
Yeah, it does.
We've established that there are big, splashy, sensationalist controversies. We've established that there have been major legislative pushes and an overhauling of NCAA policy and an entire fucking executive order coming from the Oval Office over a tiny, tiny group of athletes. What is going on here? I think what is going on here is a moral panic. So this was a term coined by Stanley Cohen in a 1972 sociology text called Folk Devils and Moral Panics. 5 stages of a moral panic. Here we go. An event, episode, person, or group of persons is perceived and defined as a threat to societal values, safety, and interests. So maybe there's been like some kind of social change. I will say a threat to societal values could be really good.
Sure. When the societal values are dumb and bad.
Yeah, a lot of societal values are dumb and bad, and we should threaten them. But a threat is made, or a perceived threat, perhaps, not even an actual threat, right? Because I would say the OG moral panic would be anti-Semitism and the Protocols of the Elders of Zion and stuff. And if there is a meeting where we're deciding what happens in the world, I was not invited to it. I don't think it's real. So it could be drummed up. It could be an actual threat to societal values. For example, another go-to example of a quintessential moral panic is the Satanic Panic about daycare workers in the 70s and 80s. But the threat that was happening was women working outside the home. It was a threat to the family structure where the woman stays in the domestic sphere and the man is the breadwinner. But the threat that was identified and perceived was daycare workers. The nature of these apparent threats are amplified by mass media, who present the supposed threat through simplistic, symbolic rhetoric. Portrayals appear to public prejudices, creating an evil in need of social control, and victims, the moral majority. So when I think of the victims of a moral panic and the moral majority, I just think of Reverend Lovejoy's wife in The Simpsons going, "Won't somebody please think of the children?"
Perfect image. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, stage 3. A sense of social anxiety and concern among the public is aroused through these symbolic representations of the threat. So I wanted to emphasize here symbolic representations, hearkening back to Iman Khalif. It doesn't matter that she's cis, she represents a threat to traditional gender expression because she looks too mannish or whatever. And so it's all about these symbols. The next stage, gatekeepers of morality, editors, religious leaders, and politicians respond to the threat. Experts pronounce their diagnoses and solutions, which include new laws and policies. This is legitimized by the media. So you think of like the spate of anti-trans editorials and coverage in the New York Times that we've seen over the past 2 years.
Unhelpful.
Unhelpful. And then the last stage is that the moral panic dies down. The debunking never makes as big of headlines as the initial panic.
No, it's not as exciting when something peters out because it doesn't have any attachment to reality, like an actual threat.
Yeah. So other examples of moral panics. D&D is Satanism, heavy metal is Satanism, satanic ritual abuse in daycares, old school anti-Semitism, and radical gender ideology.
It's interesting that you mentioned the Satanism part, because I think a lot of moral panics have that going against the Bible kind of thing. And I feel like a similar vein of homophobia, transphobia comes close to that in the sense that it's going against what is natural to God.
Yeah, and there's a lot of anxiety about the children.
Right.
Old school homophobia. I feel like people kind of forget about this now, because gay and lesbian identities are a little bit more mainstream and, family friendly. But when we all were growing up, there was this incredible anxiety about gay people recruiting children.
Being pedophiles.
And it's the exact same rhetoric that we're hearing about trans people now and drag queens and stuff.
Or even just confusing kids. Like I've heard adults throw that out there as a worry. And
which
really,
is hilarious when you see, like, the ways that straight cis people talk about their babies.
for example.
Right? Put a baby in a onesie that says, like, lady killer.
Yeah, that's weird.
It's weird.
And truly, kids are going to be fine with whatever you're fine with. If you're explaining, oh, being trans or gay or queer is just another way to be a person in the world, they're going to go, oh, okay. Because they don't know reality yet. They're learning it from the adults.
I also feel like the anxiety about children being confused. In that imagination, the worst thing that could happen is that a kid says, I think I actually might not be a girl. I think I might be a boy. And then they get a haircut and some new clothes, maybe go buy a new name for a while. And then they're like, no, actually, I'm a girl, and go back to being a girl. Like, why is that calamitous?
Why is it a problem?
Like, that seems fine.
My niece wants to be Snoopy all the time.
Yeah.
Nobody's up in arms about that.
Yeah.
And for the kids who are trans, it makes a world of difference.
Yes.
The single thing that would have made the greatest difference in my life is information earlier. That, hey, here's what it is to be trans, and it's okay. And there's love and support for you out there too. And without that, it delayed me years and years until I was basically done with college. And I was still terrified to come out and didn't have the resources to
I
do
hate
so.
that for you.
It was hard. I had to
Yeah.
write books about it,
I
Hannah.
know, they're really good, though.
Oh.
Yeah. Well, actually, can I tell you my very first memory of you, Morgan?
Please.
We were in New College Feminist Alliance,
Of which I was the president.
of which you were the president, and you were in your transition. I don't remember if you introduced yourself as non-binary or a man.
Probably
at
a
that time.
man.
And you talked about anxiety over whether you would still be welcome in that space and whether you were still, like, legitimately a feminist.
Sure, that was challenged. I had to move out of the household I was living in at the time.
No shit, that sucks.
Yeah, because it was perceived that I was rejecting womanhood. And I mean,
Not at scale.
not at scale, but, I didn't have the language to understand myself or explain myself either, and it was a mess.
Yeah, that's awful.
And I think coming from the more conservative background that I did, a thing that I hear a lot from friends and family is kind of echoing that confusion that you spoke of, is they'll say things like, well, so does a trans woman mean they're a man who became a woman or a woman who became a man?
They're confused about what even the basics mean.
Right, which is understandable. But then their response to that is, well, this is why it's just simpler to have male, female. It kind of sidesteps the entire discussion that's being had in the first place, which is the ability for people to exist in the space and mindset and body that they feel comfortable with.
I also feel like, as someone who spent a lot of time being a clueless cis person and will undoubtedly continue to be a clueless cis person a lot of the time, the big aha moment for me was when I stopped trying to conceptualize transness, or I should say, when I stopped trying to empathize with transness by imagining transitioning, and instead by imagining that I had been assigned male at birth.
Yeah, I think that's an easier way in.
That's a much easier way in, and it's not how people approach it a lot of the time.
Mm-hmm.
That speaks volumes, because I think that is exactly where a lot of people are approaching it, of, well, wouldn't it be so weird if I just all of a sudden took up life as a woman?
Yeah.
Yeah, it would. Because,
Whereas, like, if you are actually trans, you might be more like, wouldn't it be so weird if I just, like, took up life as a woman?
Yeah.
Ooh,
See what happens. Try
see
some
what
sports
happens.
next. But yeah, we're so capable of holding complexity and
Mhm.
multiple categories and different ideas. And if we just started out opening up the gender categories,
Mhm.
people wouldn't have to try to empathize. It would just be like, oh, okay, a woman's a possible thing, a man's a possible thing, genderqueer is a possible thing, changing your mind's a possible thing, like fluidity is possible. And to just be able to hold all of that from the get-go.
Yeah, you wouldn't have to, as an adult, learn that there are different ways of being besides cis binary.
And yet, after people learn these stark black and white categories and live with them for a lot of their life, I can understand it being hard to put on the brakes and open those categories up and try to understand something different kinds of pronouns, and, you know, this person you've known all their life and now their pronouns are different, and why that's hard to make that mental switch, and why early information is so important too, because it makes the switches easier or not even necessary.
The earlier on that you can learn about and conceptualize, you know, the broad, beautiful spectrum of possibility when it comes to gender, the less that learning about these things later on will register as a threat to your own gender.
Exactly.
I feel like so much of Hispanic, you know, if someone else can be trans, does that mean that my womanhood actually doesn't have anything to do with my boobs? And it's like, no, your womanhood can be about your boobs. That's fine.
It's fine. We don't need to touch your womanhood.
Yeah.
You do you.
You do you. You can have your womanhood over there.
But who does it threaten? There is a power structure at play. And I think this is kind of like speaking to that piece of like, how does this add up that we have this national conversation over less than 10 people?
So that's the next thing that I have written down in my handy dandy notebook here. The trans in sports moral panic is invested not in protecting women and girls, but in protecting traditional gender roles. Here's a little factoid that I got from GLAAD. We love GLAAD.
It says originally founded in 1985 as the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation.
Huh. Now they just call themselves GLAAD because they're also about trans stuff.
Yeah, they're pro-LGBTQ.
They had a fact sheet about this that I would encourage anyone to check out. It was like a fact sheet for journalists to refer to. And they cited research. States that ban trans participation in sports have fewer girls competing in sports than states that don't ban trans participation in sports. I feel like that's so telling. That all of this rhetoric is protect women in sports, protect girls in sports, and that it distracts from the other conditions that lead to women and girls sports having resources or not. Because if a location has generally like socially progressive values, there will be more investment in women and girls sports. Because women and girls sports kind of transgresses traditional gender roles a little bit.
Sure. Yep.
The big picture, in my opinion here, trans people are a group that have existed very much at the margins of society for a long time. And in particular, in the trans in sports debate, there are just so few trans athletes. It's just if you think of like a marginal group, like a tiny group that exists at the margins of a community, trans athletes are a great example because they're such a tiny percentage of the athletes overall. And when we think of the LGBT rights movement over the past 50 years, you know, we remember the fight for marriage equality and trans rights kind of taking a back seat for a while. You can look up a lot of statistics about trans people. Oh, and I should say, like, despite that trans people have always been at the forefront of queer liberation movements. But trans people are more likely to experience homelessness, violence, job and housing discrimination, etc., than gay and lesbian cis people and than a lot of other people. And if you look up those stats, they're staggering. I think that this is part of the process of fascism. You pick a really marginalized group that's really populationally small and fixate on it and panic about it, and you wrap it up in reasonable sounding rhetoric, in this case about protecting women and girls. And you're kind of running a beta test for how you can try to legislate a group of people out of existence. This moral panic about trans people in sports is not existing in a vacuum. It exists alongside moral panics about bathrooms, about gender affirming care for kids. And it's all part of this kind of incremental plan, right? Pick a group at the margins of society and pick an issue that seems trivial or reasonable and use that as your beta test. And then you keep on expanding from there. I think all of the ways that we talk about gender affirming healthcare or sports participation for trans people, they're going to use that same logic to start targeting gay people next.
Completely.
And the reason that it works is because the marginalized community is so small that the people in charge can bank on the fact that there's a significant part of the population that don't know a trans person or don't know a member of the marginalized community. And therefore, it's a concept to them. It's not a person.
Yeah, they're easy to other. They're easy to dehumanize.
And I feel like that shows so much in the way that a lot of people will talk about this. They won't say trans people, they'll say the trans issue. Or the fairness in sports debate or the trans in sports debate instead of the trans women in sports debate.
Language is powerful.
Language is powerful, and trans people, I feel like, this is completely observational. I have no research backing this up, but it seems to me that trans people are discussed as a question or as an issue instead of a group of people. And yeah, that's the process of fascism, is you identify a group of undesirables, you use them as a scapegoat for everything that's wrong, and you legislate them out of existence or expel them. And then you keep on doing that. First, they came for the trade unionists, and I didn't speak up because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak up because I was not a Jew. And then they came for...
They're coming for you.
They're coming for you next. Because they always need more scapegoats. Now I'm getting tinfoil hat, but they always need more scapegoats because expelling enough undesirables will never fix the social problems that the undesirables are being blamed for.
Yeah, absolutely. And it keeps everybody distracted from the powers that be so they can stay in power and afraid of them.
Yeah, because of the McCarthyism pattern that you were talking about earlier. So knowing that, we need to be selective about how we engage with this. And this is part of why I wanted to start this episode of our podcast by saying, we're not going to have a good faith debate about this because it's not an actual good faith debate, right? It's not like a reasonable conversation to have. It's not an actual good faith debate. At the same time, we don't want to alienate people who simply don't know and who might hear conversation about it and think, well, it's a good question. Testosterone does give you an advantage on the field. So what is to be done about that? On its face, that can sound reasonable, right? So what do we do? How do we talk about this? How can we be effective change makers about this? My very first thought was this old anti-fascist slogan from Latin America, which translates to "No one lets go of anyone's hand." You cannot let this dehumanization reach any group, no matter how marginal. You cannot let it creep into normalcy because it's a toe in the door. Well, also because it just should never happen to anyone.
Yeah, it's just wrong.
It's just wrong. And then my second thought was storytelling. And that was in particular why I wanted to talk to you about this, Morgan, because you are a storyteller.
Well, thanks, Hannah.
So yeah, what are your thoughts about like storytelling as an avenue for trans liberation?
I'm also an arts worker by day, so I am fully behind the power of arts and culture and language in bringing us together and humanizing each other and learning from each other. And like I mentioned earlier, speaking personally, information would have made all the difference in my life. If I had received more stories about trans people and positive outcomes without shying away from the anxieties and the loss and the realities of what it is to be trans in this world, that would have helped me come out sooner, perhaps, to find strong resources earlier. And it was actually first seeing other trans people on YouTube where I first realized, oh, I see myself in them. Like, I can actually do this. And because when I first came out to myself, I came out as a man. I didn't even come out as trans because trans in my mind was something too terrifying to be, because how do I even begin to live as a trans person? It's always sounded so scary. And then B,
and you do it so well.
well, I'm happy about it now. I'm real good at being trans. I love it. It's a wonderful life now, but it's when I first came out, it felt I had this image of my humanity, my life being this glass vase that I lifted above my head and smashed, and the act of coming out and transitioning was trying to find all those pieces. Will I still have friends? Will I still have the family piece? Can I have a career? Can I live where I want to live? Can I have the love I want to have? And I kind of like thought about my life since then, kind of testing like, okay, I'm able to get this job and work in this career I want to, and I'm able to, move to this city I want to live in. But even that it's a narrative that it's built in a cis paradigm, because where I succeeded in my career, there weren't other trans people around. And I became isolated through that. And it started to dawn on me after years in that environment, a very supportive, trans-friendly environment, but just completely cis. I came to realize, no, I do need to be around trans people. I would go to an event once a year called the Philadelphia Trans Health Conference. And that was my one time in the whole year where I was around more trans people than not. And
it's also the reason why most of the trans people I know each other.
Yeah, it was a magical, wonderful, and it's a shame that it doesn't happen in person any longer. But it was such a wonderful resource.
You have told me this before, and I know you mean so much more now than I did then, having found paraclimbing.
Sure.
I didn't realize that there was a little part of me that was shriveling on the vine.
Yeah.
Until I had started to be in a room with a bunch of other physically disabled people.
Yeah, it makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
Just breathing that air of your community.
Yeah.
And it's just like a layer removed. You can be understood in a way that you're not necessarily in just regular daily life, or for me in regular cis world. And granted, my cis world, like I love all of the cis people in my life, and they're in my life because I choose that.
And you're sitting in your friend's living room. We made a joke about it, but you are here being the voice of the trans community
all of
for
them.
us, right? Like, that's exhausting if that's all there is.
That's the word. It's just exhausting.
Yeah.
And so it's a relief to, be breathing that air of my community. Like I would go to queer and trans yoga once a week, and that was my moment to breathe that air and just relax and understand that I'm understood here on another level, where I don't have to explain myself, even if I don't speak to anybody else in the room.
Yeah.
It makes a difference, and it's beautiful to have that, and it should be available to everybody who needs it, whatever their version of that community is.
I think it's actually the best case scenario that we trans more kids. Not that you can trans a person, but that was a joke. More trans people is a good outcome.
Yeah, that was something I was thinking about when we kept repeating the statistics of 10 people out of 500,000 college athletes, but I don't know.
I would
the
love
actual
for
statistics.
this to be a much bigger problem.
Well, or just I imagine that of that 499,990 people that are remaining, there's probably a couple that might be trans that haven't come out yet.
Absolutely.
Plenty of them.
Yeah. And I would love to see them thrive.
Exactly.
Yeah. Breathe that in and to feel understood. I also find that I can be challenged much more now. They can challenge me in a way that my non-disabled loved ones can't, because my knee-jerk reflex will be, you don't get it. You know what I mean?
There's a defensiveness there?
There's a defensive that I am correct when I...
Sure. Yeah, they don't get it.
They don't get it. But coming from somebody who does get it and looks at things differently from me, that's been really eye-opening. And being able to be challenged when you're emotionally safe and physically safe, because I'm talking about rock climbing, is a great way to grow.
Completely.
And we only get that from plugging into our community.
Yeah, from being seen and being known as, well, this is what a disabled person is going to want to hear, or how, they're going to want to be challenged in this space.
Yeah.
And it's humanizing to have that. It's humanizing to feel that. And coming back to your question about stories, I think it's humanizing to see ourselves in stories. And yes, it's wonderful to learn about other lives as well. The books I wrote are the books that would have helped me if I had encountered them earlier. And while I wasn't about to get on YouTube in front of a camera because I was afraid of that, I could make a webcomic, and that's where What's Normal Anyway came from, which was a weekly comic strip that I created over the course of 3.5 years. And that became a book, and it was a wonderful way to connect with people. And some of the best comments I ever heard were from people who were, I just needed to laugh today and this gave me that, or I thought I was the only person on the planet who had these feelings and these fears. And that, I mean, that's it. That's if I get no other success in life, like I've still made it.
Yeah, that's a big
after
one.
that.
Yeah. If storytelling weren't incredibly powerful and impactful for like change making, then there wouldn't be all these book bans.
That's right, because there's so much power in books, and they know it.
Sam, what do you think? I think you have like a really useful vantage point that Morgan and I don't have as much access to about what are effective tactics for combating this moral panic and for reaching people who are maybe empathetic but misinformed.
Honestly, I think I've been hitting it on the head. This isn't an argument or a discussion or a debate that's going to be logically won.
Yeah, if it was, we would have won it already.
Right. So in that way, it's not about the debating of ideas. It's really just about getting to know people that are different from you. And I think that in the community that I grew up in, it was majority white, generally Christian homogenous culture. And there were certainly people that existed on the margins there that I think the more connections that could be made with them, the better off everyone in that community would have been, because it would have allowed the people at the margins to thrive. And I think when other people thrive, we ourselves can thrive.
Yeah.
I think the worst thing we can do is try to, as silly as it sounds, try to create a monoculture, which it seems is kind of where the leaders of our country are headed.
Yeah.
So dull.
So
Yeah.
boring.
I'm so bored.
Yeah. Give me some music that swings.
Give me some sparkle.
Yeah, give me some glitter and rainbows. So the question that we close our podcast episodes with is, how are you going to use what we talked about today to act more loving in society?
I'm trying to seek out more diverse voices in what I read, in what I watch, the music that I listen to, in the sports that I pay attention to. Yeah. I mean, I think that I'm going to link one of the Instagram reels that you sent me like a week ago.
Can you name 5 professional athletes in women's sports?
No.
So, and what are you here for?
I'm here to make sure my daughters don't have to play with men.
It was like a protest where there was all these people holding up signs that said protect women's sports. And these 2 women went up to them and said, can you name 5 professional women athletes?
I did see that. That's phenomenal. Yep.
Yeah.
And they could not.
Yeah, and neither could I, but I also don't think that I could name 5 professional men's athletes.
No, I'm not an athletes watcher personally, but I love people doing what they want to do
Hell yeah.
with their bodies, and they should go do it
Mm-hmm.
and have fun and enjoy watching it.
The question of fairness needs to come secondary to the question of inclusion. Duh. The question of fairness is an important one, but it is not nearly so important as how do we make sure that everybody gets to participate in athletics. Duh.
Well, it's duh to us.
Yeah.
And so that's something I'm reflecting on with the how to apply this in the world, because I'm on the cusp of this new book coming out,
Yay!
Chicken Heart, and I'm, excited and scared, but I'm going to be meeting a lot of new people and having a lot of events and conversations and maybe facing criticism and, being thrown into conversations like this where trans people are stereotyped or vilified and whatnot. And so I'm trying to figure out, how to be ready for that in a loving and safe way
Mhm.
to myself and to others
Yeah.
in an open-hearted way so that I'm not shutting down conversation where it could be useful and expansive.
Mhm.
But also, you know, I can't give bigotry the time of day all the time. So I'm going to have to pay attention to that.
Yeah, it is not incumbent upon you to fix the world's most hateful people.
Yeah, it's too tiring.
No.
I'm not paid enough to do that.
No.
But, you know, if and where I can, I want to have open-hearted conversations.
Yeah.
And I've got some energy and capacity for that. So I want to do that articulately and intelligently and lovingly. And I don't know exactly how I'm going to do that because
I think I'm going to steal what you're saying because at Owl Night, I was talking to a climbing friend and I told him about what we were going to be recording on our podcast next. And he said, I think more dialogue about that is good. And I jumped right down his throat. Now, granted, it was 4:30 a.m. and I had been climbing for 12 hours. So I am going to give myself the grace that he gave me. But when I heard him say it's good for there to be more discussion of that, what I heard immediately was this should be open for debate and that it is as yet unresolved. And it was the least generous reading. I did not meet him with curiosity. Meeting people with curiosity and warmth is, God, like there's so much structured around us to discourage that, you know, because if people are just like challenging you in bad faith all the time, or like trying to sap your energy or put you down all the time, then, or even if that's just not happening to you with actual interactions, but you're just inundated with messages like that all the time, then it makes it so that you are primed to hear something innocent or curious as like repeated talking points from the opposition.
Sure, you're on the defense, understandably, because that stuff beats you down. It's exhausting.
So I think a way that I can use what we talked about today to act more loving in society is to take a breath and say, what do you mean by that? Before I start opining intensely. Although I'm a good intense opiner and that's great, but I don't need to be doing it all the time.
And I don't know, maybe something's still stuck in a helpful way through your aggressive opining or however you called it.
I don't think that he is critical of trans women in sports, but he is certainly even less critical now.
Okay, fabulous. See, doing the good work, Hannah.
Yeah.
Go get your copy of Chicken Heart.
Go get your copy of Chicken
Wherever
Heart.
books are sold.
It will warm up your soul. Yeah.
Aw, thanks, y'all.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for trekking out to...
I walked 15 miles in the snow.
Thanks for
Oh,
walking
man.
15
Yeah, thank
miles
you for
in the
walking
snow,
through a
uphill both
snowstorm
ways.
for us.
Yeah, that's right.
I love you both very much.
Yes.
I love you
I
too.
love you too, Hannah.
I love y'all.
Bye.
Bye.